And welcome to The Truth in This Art, your source for conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by two incredible guests. They're returning to the podcast. First, we have a photographer and musician known for his vibrant portrayal of Baltimore's music scene, as well as his work in talent management, Micah E. And alongside him, we have a senior product designer at The Atlantic, specializing in journalism and visual storytelling, Christopher J. Chester. Together, they bring a unique blend of creativity and collaboration to the table. Welcome you both to the podcast.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Back at it again. It's been 2 years, May 2022.
You remember, at this point, right, 800 plus episodes in at this point, it's all a blur. I'm like, I talked to them,
I mean, he's an archivist. He's all about that shit.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's a factual king.
Perfect for this book too, considering it's an archive.
He's trying to get right into it.
I love it. So since we did touch on a little bit that previous interview, for folks who may have missed that one and should dive back into the archive, right? Full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Can you both briefly introduce yourselves and, share sort of a little bit that one liner of who you are reintroduce yourselves. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Christopher Chester, Baltimore native, graphic designer by day, and teaching over at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Been here my whole life. Alumni over at Micah as well. Previously, I was still working at the Atlantic, and I'm still there now, leading article experiences and just kind of building out the way in which people listen and interact with our news source.
And I'm Micah E, photographer, musician, sometimes many other things like designer and music manager. I always try and find things to keep busy. Went to Micah. I teach at Micah. My name's Micah. I be doing too much. And when we were last on, I was probably also doing those things. Maybe I was just quitting my day job over at Creative Alliance. Had a great time working there for a while, being a designer, and went full-time freelance probably right after we recorded. So for the last 2 years, no boss, no rules.
Envious. and thank you too for bringing us back, So I think we talked a little bit in that previous conversation about like collaboration, and you guys do sort of, what is it, the employees of the month. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's a collaborative thing there. You two are boys. I could see it. So let's talk a bit about sort of this more recent collaboration, this book that you guys are working on, documenting Baltimore's music scene. And let's talk about that and sort of the dynamic. Since Chris is trying to get right to it, let's get right to it. Let's talk a bit about
no
that.
one stands on business like my man right here. Yes,
very true.
So
I sit on business, by the way. No, never mind.
You stand on it or you stood on it?
I sit on it. I sit on business. Like, it's going to be right.
Not the camera shake with it. He's like, yeah. So, this book is called Scene. It's a collection of Baltimore Band Portraits I've taken over the last 8 years. So if we rewind a little, my senior thesis back in 2012, 2013, when I went to Maryland Institute, was Baltimore Band Portraits. And then in 2016, I self-released a book called Features. And then I kind of was like, well, I'll never do that again. And then I continued to make Baltimore Band Portraits just because, that's what you get hired for. And I love working with musicians. And then maybe 2 years ago, I was like, probably like right after we recorded our first podcast, I was like, oh, damn, I got a body of work here, don't I? And I realized that like so many parts of Baltimore were dying or changing when it came to post-COVID. And I was realizing that, sure, I don't have documents of like the venues and the spaces, but I have documents of all the people who have like lived here briefly, moved out of here, have a connection to this city. And I realized all the things that, not that I did wrong with my last book, but things that I want to get right this time. Yeah. Which we can talk about more later, but I basically wanted to show the beauty of this city and its eclectic music scene. And then from the jump, when I said I was ready to do it, I, had to bring in my favorite graphic designer and best friend and main collaborator. And yeah, and after that was just the curse that keeps on giving.
Thank
It's
you.
very
Yeah.
um interesting, just like collaboration and just talking early on, and Micah thinking about like this body or system of work that he's making. And I myself am very interested in like archives and systems in that way. Being from Baltimore City, seeing the like reflection and change of the city over time, but also just kind of thinking about the relationship in which we build with these spaces. A lot of the places that I call home or used to call home in Baltimore City are no longer inhabited, or whole neighborhoods themselves are just like gone. And even thinking about like the ghost of individuals who used to live or occupy these areas. And so this book in some ways is like a documentation of that, and specifically like looking at the window of the Station North, like midtown music scene specifically, and thinking about all the creation and creativity that came out of that.
Yeah, I think we realize that the task is not an easy one, and trying to even think that you're documenting a whole scene is impossible. Like I haven't made it down to Fed Hill for like the jam band scene. I'm not super tapped into the country folk scene, not completely out of it, but there's just a lot of elements that can't be fully touched on. So it's kind of like who has come through the Station North type area, interacted, and the hope is that any band of note in Baltimore should be in the book or 1 degree from anyone in the book. So she'd be able to go in, find someone, and then find someone else. The hope is to really show the scene more than it is about. I mean, I want to gas up everyone here, of course, but it's more about showing that you think these 83 bands is a lot. Well, there's so many more, and there's so many more great artists too. So it's like showing that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So, and thank you, and definitely we're going to go even deeper in there, specifically touching on the bands and a little bit more on the collaborative side of things. So, in terms of sort of that initial like conversation, like right now we're recording this at the towards the end of October just to set the stage, transparency, right? And I already put out my initial request for folks for the beginning of next season. So I'm having those early conversations, but I started thinking about this maybe in May, maybe even a little bit further, earlier. So when the initial idea of I got this body of work, let's make it together. Let's work together. You free, bro? What was that? What was that initial conversation like?
I've seen Chris's work evolve a lot over the last decade or more of friendship, and also have seen how much he's interested and works in print design constantly. He's always studying book design and working in that space, but hasn't designed a book. And so it seemed like an opportunity. So early on, I was like, you want to do this together? Like, do you want the challenge of laying out this book? Do you want the challenge of figuring out all the intricate design decisions that are needed? And I think also pitching him on how this one differs from the last book is, besides it, the last book was mostly Baltimore bands, but it was also like other bands I had photographed. And I think it was much more like I photographed people of note. And now it's much more like this is about Baltimore, and it happens to be my photos, but I got to do right by the work, but most of all, I got to do right by the people.
Yeah.
And so the metadata aspect, which we can talk more about, but is basically like making sure we say who's in the band at that time of that photo, what neighborhood that photo was taken in, when the photo was taken, and then the name of the band. Genre changes. Bands break up, websites go defunct. But what will always be true is who is currently in that photo and who is in the band at the time of this photo. Because a lot of the bands have already changed band members since I took the photo. You know what I mean? Some of the bands have broken up. And so if they break up and delete their socials and move on to other projects, how do you go, oh, that guy seems familiar. Is he in other bands 10 years from now? You look up their name, you find their other projects, which is something the last book was missing. So I think he was really interested in this like archival aspect. And I kind of hooked him in with that and then made him do a lot of work.
What was there for you, Christopher? Was there a maybe a book for like in terms of inspiration or some of those design decisions and your background with the Atlantic and all? What how does that play a role in sort of the shaping of the book ultimately?
I think for me, photojournalism has always been a big interest of mine. Thinking about the narrative that comes with a location or what is going on in a said area. Thinking about war photography, even to some degree, and kind of capturing the essence of that, looking at humanity of it all, but also understanding the story that is happening there as well. Um, in terms of some like initial books that kind of stuck out to me when I was thinking about this, I was kind of going back to childhood in some ways, thinking about some of the wonder of what you discover when you are not looking for certain things. So thinking about I Spy in that kind of way, there's a lot of interesting aspects of Baltimore that are viewed in this book that you wouldn't realize what neighborhood it's in, or maybe you have passed it or on your walk or drive that kind of become so more ceremonious
Yeah.
and really take on a painterly element or a very comforting light that can just seem like another day on your commute home or like stuck in traffic somewhere. And there is a beauty in kind of slowing down that comes with this book and really picking out the moments in time, or even thinking about where you were in Baltimore at the time in which this picture was taken. And so I think a lot about memory in that way in this city, especially in the design process, and even my own memory of like bands, places, maybe shows I went to that featured some of the bands in this book. And that's played a very strong role in this like process element.
That's a really good thing. I want to kind of like dive in a little bit further on that piece as far as like memory, right? Um, Without going too deep, because I like to tease it a little bit. For both of you, is there a particular like image in there in the book that really you're like, I remember this. This also happened this night. These other details happened this night. Because it's funny, like that whole thing of a picture is 1,000 words and all that different stuff. I always like to look at what's around the background, what was happening during this time. Like, you know, this it's an archive, I guess. Some people say that, I don't know. But I think you can tell in certain parts in an interview when it was done, what was happening in the background without it actually being recorded in the audio, what was sort of happening in the scene, what was happening in Baltimore, what was happening in the world. So for the two of you, is there like an image that really comes top of mind that like that was a really cool night, or that's that time when that dude poured that drink on that person, or what have you, when you're capturing like these images?
There, for me, I would say one of the earlier photos in the book is of Abdul Ali from 2016. And I think about the Kalan dance parties that they were throwing, and specifically like how attached he was to the presence of the work they were putting in at the Crown at the time for that. And then thinking about how there were like lines around the block and people had to wait to get in, but also just how much of a ceremonious experience it was to have that. Um, and I think about their contributions a lot in regards to that.
Yeah.
I'll answer that just with like, I don't know, it's very different for me since I also have a photographic memory. So what's kind of great about releasing photos is you're releasing your memory from having to remember all these intricate details. Like one time I've lost all my photos on a memory card, and it was just from one shoot, but it was such an amateur move, and those images like sat with me for weeks. To
Yeah.
get them out of my head were so hard because a photo simply can't exist twice.
Yeah.
You can try recreating it, but then the face, the lighting, everything can change. Everything can be a little different, right? And so much of the discovery of these, I would say like 75% of the photos in the book come from going around with the band and seeing what strikes interest for them. I love collaborating, so a lot of it's like, oh, what do you think about over there? What do you think about this? Like, and I love trying to pitch them on what I think the photo will look like. And sometimes they're like, I don't know if that'll be it.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, that's cool. And if I'm really feeling it, I'll be like, can we just try it once? And if you hate it, no one needs to know. And usually it'll work out. And I love that. But I think of two photos in particular, to your question. One is there's a photo of Natural Velvet that is on green. And I was living with the singer of Natural Velvet, Corinne Osterman, during the pandemic. And her now husband and me and my now wife were all living together. And so her and I were in the COVID bubble. This is like January 2021, the biggest spike really that had happened at that time. And they needed press photos to promote a remix EP. So the band had to be 6 feet apart. And we're outside because we don't really understand the outside inside of it all yet. And so Corinne's in her mom's wedding dress, or like a vintage wedding dress. I forget which one it is, and is sitting on a tennis court by our house. So we like walked there, scouted it a few days before we were allowed to be around each other. And so I'm like 20 feet from this photo being taken. She's 6 feet from all of her band members. And it's a composition I never would have created because I like bringing people close and seeing the interaction of people. And so luckily the band knows each other and works so well together that they were able to all strike, balanced poses even while being apart. But the distance literally that photo just simply wouldn't happen if the pandemic didn't happen. It would be something, I'm sure I would have other photos of them, but I love this photo so much. And it truly it pushed me creatively to think about this like social distancing aspect. And yeah, it hits.
That's good. That's good. And, I think having sort of that year, that context in there, someone is viewing, that's like, oh, right, COVID. That's he made that happen. He worked around it.
He was shocked how many photos were from 2020.
Yeah, especially in building out the archive. I was like, whoa, when was that? Like I was trying to place myself even in thinking about what I was doing during that time. And there's another photo, the Dial Live in his band, from like early March. It's one of the last shows that was probably played in Baltimore, but I also used the photo that Micah took to make their show flyer as well. And so I always think about like March 9th, 2020 was when that show went down, which was probably the last show in the city that week.
100%. And yeah, I shot those photos in January. And what's so funny about you mentioning is because like January 2020, I went to this shoot so sick. Like one of the sickest I've ever been in my life. And I hit everyone up. I was like, should I come to this? Like, this is at this point we think, and I don't know that it was COVID, but at this point we like are just hearing about it, like being in China, and we're not really hearing much else about it. Right. And I text the whole band. I was like, should I show up? They're like, we ain't rescheduling this. Like, cause they got like 6 members from all different places. And, so I showed up to the shoot, like, I don't think anyone got sick from it, luckily, but I was just like, I was near falling over. I like truly didn't think I would get a good photo, but collaboration. Yeah. I had Corinne there, who I just mentioned. She sometimes helps me set styles. She was there, helping run, kind of gassing people up, telling them their poses. Al Rogers Jr. was styling it. So really all I had to do was take a photo. You know what I mean? And so like by having this trustworthy crew, I'm like near falling over. Like I've never been so crossfaded in my life. And I love these photos. And they turned out because of trust, collaboration, and the power of friendship.
That's a good segue, but I at least want to comment on this before moving into that next question, which is a good segue. I feel like that's your Jordan game, Micah, your Jordan like flu game. It's just like, drag me out. I'm so sick, but I got those shots.
Listen.
Yes.
I won't miss.
So this is the segue, right? So, I've done this. I've done podcasting for it'll be 16 years in February, and 10 of those years,
flex
a little bit. 10 of those years, I had a co-host. And we, we're friends, and that's not the case anymore. And so I'm always curious, and it was a collaborative thing. And it got to a point where we were on maybe different sides of the collaborative nature of doing a creative project together. So in the midst of building this book and working together in this way in this most recent time, how does that work? Because obviously there's respect, obviously there's admiration for one's work, but there are moments when I'm a creative, I know what I'm doing. And it's like, how dare you remove that picture? Or I don't know if I jam with this layout or this decision. How does that work when you're collaborating with a friend on ultimately a creative output? That's the segue right there.
Ooh,
You want
okay.
to start that, or you want me to?
I can start that. So Mike and I have been friends for a decade now, and we've seen each other at our highs, at our lows. Creatively, we kind of align in a lot of different areas. I think we both our strong suit is that we both understand our strengths.
Hmm.
I know that he is a photographer first and foremost. He knows that I'm a designer, and we have always done really well to know when to stay in line, if you will. And so I never really questioned the images about that he chooses. And I also want to compliment how he's choosing images. And so I often think about in this book, for example, early in the layout process and thinking about the grid structure and all the system stuff of the book, thinking about what cameras he's shooting with, the formats that he's shooting with, thinking about how do we build the grid around the photos that are taking, and not just kind of cropping or stylistically placing images in a way that I feel might be aesthetically pleasing. I want to call back to the decisions that he's making through his camera.
Mm-hmm.
And then also taking some of that editorial voice that's in the book and not making it too loud. The focus itself is the imagery. And so I often try to ask him for advice, show things as they work in progress, try not to make ultimatums, come with reasoning with why I am making the decisions that are being met at a design level. I also know that he can be real with me when it comes to feedback, critique, and I don't know if I'm fucking up. He's gonna let me know, and I appreciate that. I think I've only gotten good as a designer over the years with people being honest with, and I hope that honesty continues in our friendship.
Facts. Bars.
It's great.
Yeah, so I think with us with collaboration, sure, this is our first time working on a massive project like this, but it's funny when you go to his website, I get to scroll through and see I don't know, 75% of it is featuring my photos.
It's true.
And here's the thing. My fun fact is that Chris has access to my Dropbox. That's intimate. He has access to my Dropbox folder of every sent out band portrait I've taken. So whenever I send out a band portrait folder of photos to a client, I put them in the same one folder. That folder Chris has access to. So if he gets a gig making a poster for someone, he has the open trust to grab whatever he wants out of those folders and use it however he pleases. And that didn't happen overnight. It's you don't share your calendar with someone on day one. We also have shared calendars because we used to live together and we just never stopped sharing them. And so sometimes we'll hit each other up and be like, can you do this by then? I see these things on your calendar. Any of this real? And Chris oh, no, that was ambitious. I ain't doing that. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of it is when you get to this level of collaboration, the metaphorical door on the bathroom has to be open. You know what I mean? You gotta show all the scars, all the ugly shit. And, I think the only real snafus we've had in the process is just realizing little things over the years in our workflow and our different pacings.
Yeah.
And things that are easy to ignore in the small scale. And so to your point about podcasting, when you're building a bigger project together, you start having to really address those whether it's different time structure or different communication structure, or one of us going super hard at one moment and the other one going super hard at a different moment and not feeling our timelines are lining up.
Mm-hmm.
And it does through conversation, hard conversations, you click back in.
Yeah.
And luckily, all of that, I think now we understand even more for future projects, how our flow works, and that I'm a set dates, timelines, and planner, and he cooks best when he has deadlines, timelines, and plans. So since I'm the planner, instead of just planning and hoping,
Yeah.
it's a lot of like, okay, are you comfortable with me driving?
Yeah.
And if you are, then here's how where I want us to drive to. And then he decides what route we take, what car we're driving. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of like bouncing back and forth and realizing where our skills are. And I think what's also
Good
sick is,
analogy.
yeah, I love making up analogies. And I think also it helps that he's a designer that's great at photography, and I'm a photographer that is fine at graphic design.
Good.
So like we understand each other in that sense, and we're able to be like using jargon, right? Like we can be like talking about grid structure and understanding like different kerning elements. And I can't do it like him, but when he talks about it, I'm like, yeah, that those are words I know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think when we get to these stages, you almost know, like, you guys have been friends for a long time, but you have folks who, I look at this, I do these interviews, and it's collaborative, right? I've
Hmm.
had some times where it's just like I'm going, here's the questions. You go with these questions, no response. Then the day of, yeah, so I don't really like these questions. All right. You could have, all right, cool. So you don't answer your email. I'm looking at these creative red flags, right? These collaborative red
Yeah.
flags. But then there is this sort of other notion of just sometimes it's just like one style is different than my style. So I go into it. You guys came in with the right energy, and it's just like, all right, let me balance and like level my energy at a place that it's not like highs and lows. It just drowns out. I'm like, yeah, so Micah, Chris, there's nothing there. There's no balance. So you're almost trying to like level it out. I look at that in almost any collaboration. There are times where I'll talk with someone and they want to do some of the extra steps and not understanding sort of maybe this is maybe why I go about the interviews the way that I do, as far as
Yeah.
it's not a lot of, hey, let's talk 4 or 5 times before we actually do the interview. And sometimes that does fit, but I just find like there's some trepidation, and you can almost tell early on that I don't know if this is going to work for what we're both intending to get out of the conversation. And it's almost like, and I like the sort of example of Dropbox and calendar access. It's
Hmm.
like there's walls around this conversation. Maybe the person isn't comfortable talking about their work, talking about their art, or maybe I'm not the interviewer. That my way of doing interviews doesn't really fit. So I can tell it sometimes really early on, and I've gotten a lot better, as I've gone into the whole like podcast realm and doing more and more different types of collaboration with different types of people, different personalities than maybe 2 years ago or even 5 years
Yep.
ago when this podcast started. And I would come out of the conversations early on, especially thinking like, I suck. I don't know what I'm doing. And the last piece I'll say on it, the sort of shorthand, knowing like, I know photography, design, and sort of there's that overlap. My background was in marketing, before I started doing this. So when I talk to marketing people and I talk to like social media and communication people, they're like, why aren't you just doing this? Because you seem to know it. I was like, I'm just one person. It's sort of that.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
But it is a good shorthand to be able to articulate the ideas and maybe even to an extent do the cross training, if you will. Like, this is what I'm
Yeah.
looking for. Can you help us get there? And
Well,
like, why does this not make sense? Why does this make sense?
I mean, both of us now are in academia, we're both very much aware that like the sharing of knowledge helps all of us, right? And so like yeah, like you want someone that can, market as good as you, then you uplift someone, you teach them your style and you hope they stick around, and if
Hmm.
they don't, then you've made someone's life better. And you go on from there. I think often about one of my favorite musician facts is that years ago, when I was like 19, I went to see Bob Dylan live. Whatever. He sounds like wild now. And I saw him playing the piano. I was like, doesn't he play guitar? And my friend was like, oh yeah, since his like I think he had a stroke or something. Like since his stroke, he for a while couldn't play guitar. Now he can again,
Oh,
but he took over the like organ piano part because he says he can find a better guitar player than him, but he
yeah,
can't find anyone that plays organ better than him.
nice.
And I'm like, bro, come on. Like, I think it's good to be confident, but at the end of the day, like, there's always going to be people that do better at like a thing than you, but no one can do what you do better than you. You know what I mean? Like, he wrote those songs. So
Yeah.
can someone play them better than him? Probably. Can someone write it better than him? Doesn't matter. He wrote them,
Right.
and they're great and successful. So it's like, I think we start having to put ego can look in a lot of different ways, right? Like ego, hot-headed, right? And then ego that comes from imposter syndrome, right? And both of us have spent years trying to undo imposter syndrome, but at the end of the day, it's a part of us, right?
Yeah.
It drives us, it motivates us, it makes us curious. And if we let our imposter syndrome be too loud, we don't collaborate.
True.
And you don't have to collaborate, right? No one has to. You can do everything yourself. You'll be tired, but you can. But for me, I find that if I'm going to make a book where I'm photographing people the way they want to be seen, I got to talk to them about how they want to be seen.
Yeah.
And I have to make them comfortable. They're not models. I mean, some of them do model, but you know what I mean? They're musicians.
Yeah.
They are only going to be comfortable looking in the photo if they're comfortable about the photo.
1000% same thing here. When there are a few episodes over the 800 plus that I've taken down because the guest will reach out and it's like, yo, I sound terrible in here. He's making, I was confident then, and this is not like a week later. This is like 6 months later. Like I ghosted you because when I do the rollout or have you of like the episodes up. Yeah, I'm sorry, I ghosted you. I kind of just slid there. I was a little like cautious about how I came off. And I'm like, oh no, we can take it down. Let's not, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah.
Let's circle back around it because it's curated. It's like, hey, I like your work. Let's talk about it. If you're comfortable with talking about it, but comfort is key. And again, that's the purpose of really like checking in with the person the entire time to make sure everything is good. And it's not about, I got to get this many episodes out, or I talked to this great guest or what have you, or wrote these questions. It's more so like, is there something that's coming out of this? Does the person feel comfortable? Do I feel like I've learned something? Am I still curious and all of that different stuff? Once those are checked, everything else is gravy. Sausage
I feel
gravy,
like
gravy.
listen, I'm a vegetarian, veggie gravy. So I feel like the reason we always have this synergy when the three of us are talking is like Chris treats his design very similar as I treat my photo, as you treat this. It's like, I love that this podcast talks to very established people in the art world and people that are art curious and people that are surrounding the art world in their own art form. And I think like it's so important. And I feel this way. We talk about this about free work too. Like if you do a favor for a friend, you can't phone it in. Your name's on that.
Yeah.
Not only is your name on that, but like you agreed to doing it. That's on you, bro. Like, so the point is like we try and treat everything, whether he's doing something huge at the Atlantic or he's doing something for a band that has one song that is trying to play their first show. And they hired him, right? Like he treats them the same, puts the same amount of energy into it. Like it's his Super Bowl. And I treat my photos the same. Sometimes it's like a person that's like, hey, I just would really love to be photographed like a band. You know what I mean? They want to feel that energy. And I'm like, cool. And I'm not going to treat it like some kid playtime. Like I'm going to give them the full fantasy, the full experience. And I think that if you treat it all with the same respect of collaboration, then it's like, I don't know, it's very humbling in a good way. But yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, that level of investment and collaboration, whether it's with Micah, with another person that wants some work or like a client, you're also in it for yourself. You're thinking about, do people see me in this work if my name is attached to it? And there's a beautiful feeling when somebody goes, oh, I know you did that poster, or I know you did that
I know
work,
you did that.
and I didn't even see you post about it, or I didn't even see like you had like shared it. You weren't even tagged. Like
So
I just know,
coded.
which is cool. It's a good feeling because it's like, one, people can just identify that I did something off of just the way that it's structured and the way that it looks. But also, like, it makes me feel good because I'm giving them the same level of quality of work that people can see in other work that I've already done.
Yeah.
And so there's a beauty in that. I wanted to continue that. I don't think there's a kind of a watering down of the work in which you have to do or
Mm.
which the work you want to collaborate with anybody. Sometimes we may take on jobs that we might not necessarily want to do, right? But sometimes you come out of that with a new perspective, a new understanding about yourself, a new perspective about your own process. And there's always growth when growth doesn't seem present.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So I got two things I want to close out on. I got one last real question, and I got a couple rapid fire questions.
All
So
right.
the last real question, it makes sense to go back into the book very intentionally with this sort of last question. As Micah touched on, massive project, right? So I saw a few numbers: 300 plus pages, 80 plus bands. Talk a bit about sort of the amount of work once you've gotten the 8 years of sort of like documented sort of photos and all of that there. Talk about sort of the timing in building everything out as we get closer and closer to the release. And and sort of the other thing, I guess, is in selecting sort of maybe the images, like, okay, maybe we do more than this number. Maybe we should cover more bands, sort of the trimming down, the final cutting, if you will. I know that's a heavier, weightier question, but that's what I want to kind of close out on there.
Yeah, Chris and I both work well with rules, right? And parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me at least, I knew the last book was in alphabetical order. I knew I wanted to do that again. Alphabetical order sets a very archival, very like structured way, and it also kind of like fucks with you in a cool way, which is like that you have to design and lay out a photo book that flows well with the photos you've already taken, but in alphabetical order. So it's not always about the best band. I mean, the best photo. It's about the best photo of that band that also flows into the next page. Also, other parameters like each band either has one spread or two spreads, never more.
Yeah.
So and the hierarchy of how many spreads you get isn't based on fame. Dan Deacon's in the book, he's got one spread just because there's one photo that really cements it and you don't really need the other photos were just taking away from the power of the one photo. So there's no fanfare in that way, right? So those parameters kind of help shape it. And then like on a more technical level, I laid out the book in an early draft. Then Chris saw it, and you can kind of talk about like when you saw mine, how that helped you structure it. So
Yeah, so like early on, we had the first draft. There was a lot of like, ideas, thinking about layout, thinking about the sequencing of images, where text was being placed, the use of color, black and white. I kind of come in with like uniformity, thinking about how do we take this
consistent
sequence.
king.
Yeah, establishing consistency. It's almost like when you are planning your first day back to school fit. There's a system to what shoes you're putting with those pants, what the top's going to be, like how you styling your hair, like thinking about it in that same way. Are you getting a fit off? Are we getting a fit off in this book? Same kind of idea in that way. But I don't want to tell Micah what photos not to use. I may tell him to switch the order up. And so there are a lot of times in planning out the layout, like where I just counted every variation of a layout he did in the first draft, counted them up, counted up how many times they were used, ranked them. And I was like, all right, you clearly like these 5, right? But then we've got like 30 one-offs. So let's think about which of these one-offs can become like core templates for images. Like what are the 5 layouts that we can use to represent the artist in here? And then the supporting layouts, what are the other like 10 that we can use that? So we end up coming from like, I don't know, 30, 40 layouts down to a core like 15.
Oh, wow.
And I'll say that like in a non-serious sense, that really pissed me off, right? Like I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, but I did it. It's here. you know? And then I think about it and I'm like, consistency makes sense. And so then I'm like, how about instead of like reveling in this feeling of like, oh, I got to do this again, I like go in and go, okay, I get to do this again. So like, what does it look like if I reach those parameters? And I know, and there was one or two cases where like I tried alternate spreads and I was like, this ain't it. But I would say 90% of the spreads that I had to retool are way, 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 way better because of it. And then that 10%, I was just like, can we please add like one or two little more grids, please? Like I beg and I grovel. No, no. So I go back to them and I'm like, these just won't work another way. And we like add one more in there, one more like template layout kind of thing. And then I end up making that happen a few more times so that it's not soloed as in like one instant of it. So it's like meeting in the middle in that way actually created, I mean, so much better of work. I mean, I've relaid out this book like 900 times over the last 2 years and it's like driving me nuts. And then I look at it, I'm like, all right, but it's it. I hear you.
That's good. Thank you. That definitely answers like two questions that I had there. I was able to get it into one, so that's really good. Hey guys, Rob Lee here, chiming in the middle of the podcast, and we'll be right back to that in a moment. But I wanted to remind you that if you're following me on Instagram, and I hope you are, The Truth in This Art, make sure that you explore the links, the link in bio. I know that people always talk about follow me, link in bio, and all of that, but there's some valuable stuff in there, such as a survey for my newsletter. You've probably received the newsletter, and if not, definitely sign up for it. There's some interesting stuff there. We have profiles on certain guests. We have sort of curated episodes because we're around 800 right now, and it's a lot to go through, and all of them won't be available on every platform all the time. So being able to revisit and go back there to check out those episodes is important. So definitely check out the survey. Let us know what you think of the newsletter and what you would like to have included in there, and continue to make this podcast yours as well as mine's. And yeah, back to the podcast, rapid fire. Here's the first one. And I'll give my answer. It's not sexy, but it's the answer. For me, it's pistachios. For you, the question is, what's a food or snack that you can't resist no matter what time of the day? Like if I got shell pistachios anywhere in the crib, I get 2 5-pound sacks per week. I get loose.
Ooh, I feel like I know what our joint answer could be.
Well, first off, I would go absolutely nuts, no pun intended, if there was a bag of pistachios sitting out. That being said, I don't keep them in the house because I go absolutely nuts for them and I have no self-control. You answer it.
Peanut M&Ms.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Easy. Come on, bro.
You put a container of Costco peanut M&Ms and we are both fucked up.
Barrel.
Like that bin would be finished, which is why I don't buy Costco peanut M&Ms.
Just put on an A24 movie and just leave like a bucket of peanut M&Ms.
We go to the
That's
movies.
a trap.
We go to the movies. They're like, oh, peanut M&Ms are like $37 for 4 M&Ms, and I'm like, bet.
Yeah, that's good.
Look, there was. I had this conversation. This is how I knew I was going to be friends with this dude. I had this conversation with this musician, Jimmy Watkins. We were in DC walking around, and we were all like engaging in sort of like fat guy story snacks that we're into, and I was like, yo, look. This is what I do. I get all my favorite M&Ms. I get peanut, I get almond, and I get peanut butter. I make that into a trail mix. He's like, yo, that's next level. So
I like calling that a trail mix. You on the trail would be cross-faded if you had that. You're like on mile 2 and you're like, let me just have a bite of my trail mix. And it's just 3 types of M&Ms. They got protein though. They got protein,
peanut butter,
a lot and almonds and peanuts. That's protein. You walk around, you walk around someone with a nut allergy, they are done.
It's over.
Your breath is pistachio, almonds, peanut, and peanut butter. Like they can't even be around you. You are just emanating allergens.
Can't let my man on a plane.
Yeah, I can't let Rob Lee on a plane.
Typhoid Mario.
Very true.
So here's the last one I got for you. So when you're prepping whatever, let's say the work is for a given day, right? Whether it's a shoe, whether it's working on a design project, what have you. Is there like sort of any quirks, any rituals that you get into that you get engaged in? I'm in my studio space, so I'm looking at the remnants of several incense and candles that I just have in here. I don't know. Someone mentioned it to me, and now I just have it in here, getting rid of maybe the funk, but also the negative spirits in here of you're not good at what you do. And that's part
Getting
of
rid of the
like the
peanut
process.
smell.
It is the peanut smells, the pistachios and the peanuts. A lot of fiber in those. So, for you, are there any quirks or any rituals you engage in before going into a creative pursuit?
Usually a tea or coffee I have to start out with before I dive into any form of work. Usually a comfort album of some sort. I always have to put on a fit, even if I'm not leaving the house. I can't do work in like pajamas or like cozy clothes. And if I'm really locking in on some work, I have to do it from my office. No couch. Like I have to really be in the work mindset. And these are all the little things I developed over like the pandemic, but thinking about how I can be so easily distraction by comfort. And if I have like the comforts and if I'm not working with Micah and I'm just by myself, some of these comforts will just take over. So I have to feel like I'm going to work in order
You
to
leave
do
Final Fantasy too close to Chris. Done. 7 days later.
Oh man, yeah, the PS5 does talk to me like the Green
It's
Goblin.
like, come back to me.
It keeps
Your
calling.
controller is charged.
Great.
Um, for me, yeah, that's really funny. I think the pandemic really teaches you like, yeah, like what your bare necessities are and like how you can even when before you even leave the house, what you need to like get up and get ready. For me, I got to make a matcha. The process of making a matcha, the whisking it, it's very relaxing, wakes me up a little bit, both in the process and in the drinking it. Um, and then I can kind of work from anywhere. Usually it's like the couch with my big dog next to me or at my desk if I'm like scanning film and like really locked in, like, Chris was mentioning. But yeah, I also Chris and I, have our radio show, Employees of the Month, what we do monthly. So like even before this, and now I just have a reason for my madness, but I listen to like 6 to 8 new records a week. So I'll like load up all those records on Friday, and then during the work week, I'll play a record. Or in my most feral is me with Lightroom open, editing hundreds of photos while I have like a TV show playing in the background. Maybe I forgot I have music playing on my laptop, my dog's barking like crazy, and I'm just honed in. I'm just honed in. Nothing can stop me.
I love it. And thank you both. So that's kind of it for the podcast. So there are two things I want to do as we close out here. One, in these final moments, one, I want to thank both of you for coming back on. This was great, a success, some might say, and I'll say. And two, I want to invite and encourage the two of you to shamelessly plug social media, website, and sort of the any dates around the book because we're wrapping up here. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, you can find me at Christopher J. Chester on Instagram, ChristopherJChester.com if you want to check out the graphic design work. You can listen to Employees of the Month monthly on gutsyradio.org if you want to hear more of us yapping, but also just hear some of our musical interests as we dive into a new playlist. And yeah, Mike, I'll throw it to you.
Cool. Yeah. You can find me, Micah E. Wood, on Instagram, Micah E. Wood on Apple Music, Spotify, MicahEwood.com. It's also my email. Just, I don't know. You can find me. Consistency, consistency. Yeah. And we have this book, Scene, coming out December. I want to say like 12th, 14th. We said 12th, but then we're actually doing a release event on the 14th. So who knows? You could probably get a copy a couple days before, but let's say December 14th. We'll be at Greedy Reads. Teri Henderson is moderating. I think it's at like 6 p.m., I want to say. I might be making that up, but I feel good about it. And yeah, and then I think we're doing a little after party thing at Baltimore Photo Space, but that's still in the work. And then there'll be a little gallery on December 18th at Metro Gallery. Figured we'd do some photos from the book shown in a gallery venue.
Yeah.
um, And then, and the only other thing on Employees of the Month is that, it's fully free. And if you go to Mixcloud and you search Gutsy Radio, there's a whole playlist of all 42 episodes we've done so far. It's yapping, it's music, it's pointless, it's very informative.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Micah E. Wood and Christopher J. Chester for coming on to the podcast and telling us a bit about their collaboration, Scene, and what's coming soon. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.